Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a hotter sex life, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, solid friendships, a powerful legacy. Find out how good you can have it on this episode of Man Alive. Head over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power that accelerates your career and solidifies your confidence with women.
I'm so honored to be here tonight with our guest, Gay Hendricks. Gay, thank you so much for being here. You feel to me like the father of so many different movements around love and relationship and self-love, and it's such an honor to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Shayna. It's my pleasure.
So tonight we are going to talk about what we're calling the fulfillment cure, how to overcome the root issue that keeps us dissatisfied in love, which feels like a really deep and, dare I use the word juicy topic. It feels like we are, I would say it feels like there's a relationship crisis happening where so many people are in relationships and not fulfilled, or, more than 50% of relationships are ending in divorce or separation these years. And I think 70% of second marriages are dissolving or ending. So I'm really excited for the wisdom that you have to bring to this.
Well, thank you. It's a really profound subject to be talking about. The philosopher Tasso said that all time not spent on love is wasted. In a way, he's right, because, at the heart of everything is our ability to love and be loved.
Yeah.
If you're coming through your life to the end of your life, and if you're evaluating your life at the end, I've sat with many people in their 70s and 80s as their life was ending, and, that it comes down to how much love do we let ourselves express and how much love do we let ourselves receive. There are some big barriers to that each of us have, and our job in life is to clear those barriers so that we can have that full-time, all the time, always experience of love.
I love that. So beautiful. I imagine most of our listeners will have heard of you, but for, a listener who hasn't, I'll just give you a quick explanation of who you are. And then I have many, many questions for you. So if you haven't known of Gay, then you are in for an incredible treat. Gay Hendricks has been the leader in the field of relationship transformation and also body-mind therapies for over 45 years, and has written and co-authored with his wife, Katie, 35 books. 35 books. That is amazing, including the bestseller Conscious Loving, and which is also used as a primary text in universities around the world, and thank God for that. That's amazing. Gay has authored seminars worldwide and appeared on more than 500 radio and television shows, including Oprah, CNN, CNBC, 48 Hours, and others. And in addition to the work with the Hendricks Institute, Gay is also continuing his new mystery series that began with the first rule of 10. And you just had a new book come out, am I right?
Yes, just this month. The new one is called The Fourth Rule of 10. And to explain that, my hero is named Tenzing Norbu, and his nickname is 10. And all of the books have the name 10 in them.
Beautiful. And I'm imagining it's about consciousness and love and everything that you work with in the nonfiction, but in this fictional realm.
Yes, he's a private detective. He's a Tibetan Buddhist private detective, and so he meditates as I do every day, and does a lot of very conscious things. But he also has problems he has to deal with in relationships, and he's a little bit of a klutz in his relationships, and so he's got a lot of learning there. And he's sort of like I was back in my 20s and 30s.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, let's dive into your experience over the past 40 years of working with men. And, what I'm really curious about first is what problem you see men having most, or more than any other what do you see men struggling with?
Well, for me, everything changed in 1974. It was 40 years ago now, when I had an experience of really learning to love myself for the first time. And as I began to open up to that in myself, I realized that we all have that problem, and particularly men do, I think, because men often are used to kind of thinking of themselves critically all of the time, and they approach something that needs to be changed in themselves from a critical perspective. In other words, if I find a part of myself I don't like, if I beat on it enough, it'll go away. Well, that's a totally skewed way to look at things, because really things don't change in us until we actually come to lovingly accept ourselves as we are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so common. I mean, with all the men and the women I've worked with over the years, there's such a tendency to try to change through that critical lens, right? And through like, oh, if I could just get rid of this one thing, if I could just get rid of the thing that's causing me suffering, then somehow I would actually feel better.
Well, that's the thing that happened to me, this big enlightenment moment in 1974. I was actually walking in the forest at the time, and I had a question kind of, what is the one thing that keeps me stuck? In other words, if I'm not feeling good, what is the one thing that's in the way of me feeling good again? Or if I've got a problem in a relationship, what's the one thing that I can do to help me move things back into harmony again? And as I was standing out in the woods there, I just kind of opened up and asked that question to the universe rather than asking myself. I just kind of phrased that question. And suddenly I had this amazing realization. It felt like this bolt of energy moved through me that felt really wonderful. It actually, I'm going to say it felt divine, because it actually felt like a very spiritual moment. But what the message was in this experience was, the one thing we're doing wrong is we're not loving and accepting ourselves as we are. We're trying to change by hating ourselves. And that was such a big moment for me. And so I stood there under these trees, and I just loved one thing after the other as it came up. You know, I loved my body. I loved, which I'd hated. I had been very obese earlier in my life, and so I'd kind of come to hate my body. And by then I was no longer obese, but I still kind of felt like a fat person, even though I wasn't on the outside anymore. And so I just had all of those things come up, and one after the other, as I lovingly accepted them, they just dissolved. And I realized I'd been trying to kind of get rid of things the wrong way my entire life by kind of shaming them out of me, saying, you know, if I had a headache, I would say, I didn't say, wonder why I have a headache right now. I just, and take some aspirin or something. But I learned very quickly that if we can get into a loving relationship with our emotions and our body, and what I call now our body intelligence, our ability to feel things, and we don't get much body intelligence training in school. You have to kind of learn that. You know, like, I don't know if you had a class, but I never had a class.
No, I never had a class in anything like that.
No, I never had a class in communication. Like, can you imagine that? I went all the way through high school and all that without ever getting 10 minutes of training on how to communicate. I mean, that's shocking to me.
It's a travesty. I've always had this vision of, having that, and really, I mean, maybe this is your next project or my next project, right? Starting that kind of body training and communication training in kindergarten or preschool. I mean, I think it is happening a little bit more these days, but most of us didn't grow up with any of that.
You know, it's really true, because I can remember when I was in the 6th grade, spending hours memorizing the capitals of the states and the capitals of the countries of South America and that kind of thing. And nobody's ever asked me any of those things.
No, and you work with, communicating and connecting with people and, dealing with your own struggles and challenges on a daily basis. And it's amazing that we're not taught about that. And I'm loving, I just had this big sigh as I imagined you standing in the woods, and I feel so blessed that we get to be let in on that moment of yours. And the one thing I'm really curious about what you said is you said, I just started loving those parts of me. And I'm wondering if you can tell us how you did that, because in some ways it sounds simple, and in other ways I can see that a lot of listeners may have a struggle with that. Like, well, how do I just love those parts of me?
Great question. Well, let me be very specific about it. Let's take something that, let's see if we can find something that almost everybody has difficulty with. Let's say their anger, because anger is a natural human emotion. It occurs in daily life, but almost nobody has a kind of a good, loving relationship with their anger. Almost everybody, if they get angry, feels like apologizing for it and that kind of thing. So, and truly, people, if they express their anger in inappropriate, hurtful ways, it does cause a lot of difficulty. But let's take the emotion itself. So instead of shaming yourself for feeling angry, let's approach it in a whole different way. Think of someone right now that you know for sure you love. Just see if you can think of somebody. Okay, like for me, right away I think of a friend of ours' new baby, and he's been coming over. They bring him over to swim in our swimming pool because we keep our swimming pool heated in the wintertime. And so this little guy, he's like 8 or 9 months old now, and he is just a beam of light. And I think of loving him, and I feel a sense of love in my body, the actual emotion, the feeling of love in my body when I think of him.
Yeah.
Now, let me just open up and love my anger that same way. So you think of someone you know for sure you love, and you get that feeling of love kind of fixed in your body, flowing in your body, and then you open up and use that love to love the thing that you're having difficulty loving in yourself. There's lots of things. I've kept a kind of a rough count over the years of the things that people have most difficulty loving. I would say almost everybody has one or more parts of their body that they don't like or feel ashamed of or something, that when they look in the mirror, they don't give themselves a beam of approval. They give themselves a kind of a dirty look, like, why do I have to look like that? And so that's one of the main things. But another one I found is that almost everyone has one or more emotions that are just natural emotions, but they have some kind of habit of shaming themselves for it. I remember treating one time when I had a regular psychotherapy practice back when I lived in Colorado. I was a university professor out there for 21 years in the counseling department at the University of Colorado, and I also had a private practice. And one time a woman who was in a religious order came in, and she was developing some symptoms, early symptoms of cancer. And as we talked, it turned out she had always shamed herself for having sexual feelings. And she was having sexual feelings toward one of the other sisters in the convent, and she was feeling so ashamed about it. But the more ashamed she felt about it, the sicker she got. And so what turned the corner for her was opening up and realizing, wait a minute, I don't have anything to shame myself for. Those are natural human feelings that are coming up. And we all need to know that our sexual feelings are all okay. You need to be smart, though, about how you express your sexual feelings. And so, in helping her work with that, the door that opened for her, though, was to develop a genuine, loving relationship with her natural, organic sexual feelings. And in my experience, Shana, almost everyone has at least one thing like that that's bothering them, that they've really never learned to love and accept as it is. And I think, if we're talking about the fulfillment cure here, I think if you really want to get fulfillment in your life, what you'll do first is go on a friendly kind of exploring mission and find all the parts of yourself you've never really loved and accepted, and just sit down for 10 minutes or half an hour, like I did. It took me probably 2 hours that first time, just to spend time bringing forth the things that you've always shamed or not liked about yourself and just bathing them in love. It feels delicious.
Yeah. I love, too, that one of the ways you put it was these natural human feelings, right? And it's what I've seen in my work with people is that, and in my own experience, too, is that it seems like there is something shameful or embarrassing or just wrong, I mean, based on how we were raised and what the people around us liked and how we, what got us love and all of that. There's all these psychological reasons. But then to really bring it back to these natural human feelings, right? And to me, when we break it down or look at it through that lens, like, oh, nothing I'm experiencing is actually wrong, which seems pretty connected to what you're saying. If we can actually love and accept the feelings or the whatever's happening inside of us, there's this relief and this easing of all that tension and all the ways we can twist ourselves to try not to be that or express that.
It was really, that turned a corner for me in 1974 because I realized up until that moment, I think I'd always kind of held myself at a distance, there's this great line in a James Joyce book, Finnegan's Wake, where he says, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. And I felt like that, kind of like I wasn't really occupying all of myself. But it was really amazing when I had that feeling for the first time, that moment of really loving myself. It was like, yeah, you're right. A part of me just kind of relaxed inside and calmed down and felt at peace, I think, for the first time.
And then would you say, because what you just said is that you said you felt, I can't remember what word you used, separate or distant, or would you say that shifted in your how you could connect with people then, or connect with women from that?
Yeah, I think it was very important for me to get my mind and my body in the same zip code, to be really in the same place. And it became possible for me then to, I think, have real relationships with people, because up until then I think I kept so much of myself hidden. I grew up like a lot of men with a kind of a macho ethic. My older brother was, I remember him actually telling me one time I got hit by a baseball in Little League Baseball, and I cried. And I remember my brother, he was 7 years older, kind of telling me afterwards, look, man, crying doesn't work in this neighborhood. You don't want to cry around here, and you want to fight back and that kind of thing. And so I remember just, feeling so ashamed about crying.
Mm-hmm.
But, in relationships, in real relationships, I've found that you have to be upfront with your feelings, because I've counseled literally hundreds and hundreds of couples in my career, and I can tell you that one of the main complaints that people have is, you don't tell me what you feel. You don't tell me your feelings. You don't ever share your feelings with me. And, 90% of the time it's a woman saying that to a man, but a certain time, men are saying it to women too nowadays. I've actually counseled relationships now where the man is much more in touch with his feelings than the woman is oftentimes, and so things have really shifted around. But women often, I've found, are more at ease, I think, with their feelings than men are, maybe because they've had more training, over the years, not training so much as experience.
And it's been accepted that, women cry or girls cry. That's okay. That's part of it. Whereas, like you just said, your brother told you specifically, you do not cry. That's not what you do if you're a man.
Yeah, or you're not supposed to admit other feelings like being scared, too. That's another no-no. And, I grew up in the 1950s, and there was the big actor of the time was John Wayne. He was kind of the ultimate macho guy. And, I kind of took a fix on him as sort of the ultimate man, so you never talked about your feelings. You were the strong, silent type. But in my 20s and early 30s, I had a lot of women who would say to me, who are you really? Why don't you ever talk about who you are? Why don't you ever share your feelings? And you know what, Shana? It sounded like they were asking me to do something in a foreign language that I didn't even understand what they were talking about.
Yeah. Well, how did you then, I have 100 questions I could ask you, but as you said that, I'm curious, how did you make that shift, for the men who are listening and it does still sound like a foreign language, or, there's so many judgments associated that have happened in our young lives of weakness or, like you said, not being manly and all of that. So how did you start to make that shift from hiding to actually showing yourself?
Well, I think it was just a lot of little bits of practice. I started to try it out. I started to say, and like in my 20s and early 30s, when women would say that to me, I thought they were just hassling me. I didn't understand. It hadn't occurred to me yet that maybe these people had some wisdom to share with me that I ought to be listening to. Now when men ask my advice about, how to get along with women, I'd say the first thing is just listen to women, because you guys have such great ideas, and you have so much to share, but men are programmed not to listen very much to women. And in fact, I had one of the funniest moments of my entire life. My wife, Kathleen, also known as Katie, she and I were on a talk show one time with a very, I won't mention his name, but he's a very suave interviewer, and so we were on his television show, and after the show, he came over to me, and he was on about I think his fourth or fifth marriage at the time, and he said, I noticed that when your wife is speaking, you appear to be listening to her. And he said, where did you learn to do that?
Wow.
I said, well, it really helps because I find what she's saying fascinating. I find it interesting what she's saying. And I remember the expression on his face was something like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that. But I can't tell you how many failed listening experiences it took me to just figure out to just listen to women. And so, like early on in my relationship with my wife, Katie, she had a full-time private practice at the time, and she'd come home from doing 8 hours in a row of therapy, and she would say something to me like, I'm tired. And I would immediately jump into fix-it mode, because I thought my job was to fix it. So I'd say, well, why don't you just sit down and do a little yoga, or can I make you a cup of tea? And finally one day she said, you don't have to do anything when I say something like that to fix me. I'm fine. I just want to share with you how I'm feeling. And I remember it was like a moment of enlightenment for me, because I realized, oh my God, I don't have to fix her or improve her or try to make things okay. I can just listen to her. It was a huge moment for both of us, and another part of me, I think, inside kind of relaxed at that too, because that's quite a burden to carry around, is thinking you need to fix people all the time.
Yeah, and I see that with people who I've worked with in long-term relationship, and then I can also see the impact that has on those first moments or first dates, where instead of treating it like an interview or having to know the next thing to say or the next right question or getting into that frantic cycle of, am I doing this right? So I need to think of really good things to say, or, that when I've worked with men and actually taught them to listen, and that then spontaneously, something will arise. When you're really listening and you're really tuning in, and like you talked about with your whole body, right, and your whole self, then you have access to so much more information that then sparks new questions and new comments, and as opposed to that thinking, like you said, and that pressure of, okay, I need to figure out how to help her, how to fix her, how to make her feel better, and if I make her feel better, then things are going to go well.
Yeah, one thing I really learned and have taught in a lot of our relationship seminars is how to look for what we call listening filters or listening shields. A listening filter is how you've come to habitually listen to another person. Or, let's say that you're a super liberal Democrat and you go to a lecture by a super conservative, or vice versa. A super conservative goes to a Hillary Clinton lecture, let's say. They're going to be listening with a certain filter. They're going to be hearing certain things. And I found in relationships that people come in with listening filters where they're listening for criticism. So if the other person says something, it sounds like criticism to them. Or they're listening to argue with the other person, or they're listening to critique the other person. But one thing that I've found in relationships is that when you can kind of notice and see what listening filters you have, there's this whole other type of listening that occurs where it's really free of any kind of expectations about what the other person is going to say. And so it brings forth a type of real deep conversation that's very nurturing. And when I first wrote my little book, Learning to Love Yourself, it was right after I had that experience. And I mean, not right after it, but it was, a couple of years afterwards. But the book tells all about the detail of that. And I mentioned that because they're just getting out a new edition of that this month.
Awesome.
So it's very exciting to me that a whole new generation, since it came out, 30-some years ago, 35 years ago now almost, a whole new generation is going to be able to read it.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so, so important. I mean, would you say, as we're talking about the overcoming the root issue that keeps us dissatisfied in love, is that what you would say the root issue is?
Definitely, because until you come into a sense of loving acceptance of yourself, you're always going to have a rattle inside between what's going on and what you accept and love and what you hate about yourself. And so that rattle gets worse and worse as you get older until finally you really have to resolve that in life, I think, in order to have the kind of real deep relationships. And here's why, Shana. See, if you come into a relationship not loving yourself, you're going to be looking for the other person to do it for you, to confirm you or to approve of you. And that doesn't work ever, because it's kind of like a dog chasing its tail around. It never catches it. The only way to create a healthy, loving, conscious relationship is to first do that work yourself, to really love and honor yourself and come into that sense of harmony with yourself. And then that attracts another person who loves themselves. And you get a relationship between two people who love and honor themselves, and that's some real magic when that happens.
Such magic, such magic. I was talking about this, I can't remember with who recently, but that when you're not loving yourself and when there's some dynamic set up where you're looking for someone else to confirm you, and then that person's usually looking to you to confirm something else, it's like once those things shift, or once we find love for those parts of ourselves, the relationship dynamic dissolves or explodes, right? I mean, if a relationship is based on something that wasn't foundational, or that wasn't something that actually is sustained in us, then relationships don't last. And I think that's probably what's been happening for so many years now, is that people are forming relationships based on this desire to feel good or to confirm something in themselves. And I'm curious if you agree with that, or if you have a different take on what's been happening over the years.
Well, I think what happens is that each of us has unconscious things that drive our relationships. Like, let's say you have a high need for approval. Let's say you didn't get much approval when you were growing up, and so you've developed kind of a sensitivity about that, and you have a high need for people to confirm your self-worth. Well, you may attract somebody unconsciously who puts you down all the time because you're used to that. You're used to not thinking of yourself as worthy of love. And so you'll manifest a person that gives you a hard time until you overcome that part of yourself. I've seen that so many times. And in fact, it's a real problem with people with addictions, because oftentimes they'll end a relationship with somebody who's an alcoholic and then go right out and get somebody who's a smoker or addicted to Valium or something like that. It's almost like they have a need to have that kind of person in their lives. And it's a real difficult habit for people to maintain.
Yeah, definitely. I see that too. Well, I'm curious if there's anything, I have another question or another direction we could go in, but I'm curious if there's anything from your book, Learning to Love Yourself, that you want to highlight for men today.
Well, one thing, they can always go to the heartsintrueharmony.com website and look at it. It's got a lot of different details about it there. But I think it's called the Learning to Love Yourself Special Bundle or something. It's got my audio voice reading of the book, too. But I think the heartsintrueharmony.com website has all that kind of information in it. But one thing I'd like to really single out is that you do this kind of work, loving yourself, I say 10 seconds at a time, because it's what comes up during the course of the day that needs your love. And that is, like, let's say something happens and you feel anger. Well, anger is the thing at that moment that needs your love. So it needs 10 seconds of your love. It doesn't need an hour of your love, but you just need to, it's kind of like embracing an old friend. You don't need to stand there on the street and hug your old friend for an hour. You just need to have a good, solid hug, and then you've reconnected. Well, the same thing with all of our emotions, like our sadness and fear and anger and sexual feelings, and even our joy needs our love, because most of us have a very limited ability to let ourselves feel joy for very long without coming up and messing it up. And that's what I call the upper limits problem. Having an upper limits, kind of an upper limits governor on how much good feeling you can let yourself feel.
So 10 seconds at a time, and really it sounds like bringing that love, like you were talking about, that acceptance and that love that we can tap into by feeling what it's like to love someone else who it's really easy to love, and bringing that back to ourselves in that moment.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Good. Okay, great. Okay, so if maybe the answer to this question is what we're already talking about, but you at some point mentioned, a change, that if men were to make a big change in the way they relate to women, that would have them have more fulfillment and have more joy and love and passion and all of that, what would that be?
Well, to get right down to the fundamentals, we touched on listening, and that is such a key thing, because right down to the fundamentals, a man has to ask himself, do I really feel like women are my equals? Because so many men have been programmed to think of women as lesser beings. And, I mean, you certainly can look around the world and see women in conditions of various degrees of enslavement, but it doesn't matter if you're wearing a high heels or a burqa, that covers your whole body. In a way, if you're a woman, you're coming out of thousands and thousands of years of being treated as a possession rather than an equal. And now we're having an opportunity in my lifetime, in our lifetime, to really connect as equals. And it's never been done before, really, in history. And so it's so exciting, because you see, for thousands of years now, it's been male heroes, male kings, male popes, male presidents, males. And so men have been in power for thousands of years. If you go back probably, 10,000 years or so, there was a time when there was much more goddess worship, there was much more women being highly valued. You find statues of women going back, many thousands of years before they started putting statues of men up. And so there was a time when women were more highly valued than they were over the past few thousand years. But now I think the pendulum is swinging, but I don't think it's going to swing back in the following way. What I think is that neither men or women are going to be the sole heroes of the new era. It's going to be the relationship between all of us that's the hero, the flow of relationship. And that to me is important because that goes around the world, that's global. And so to me, the future of men and women and the future of the world in general is going to be more toward equality in relationship. And it's a huge thing that's being fought out right now in front of our eyes, because you see all over, like I've been through the Middle East and Egypt and places like that, and you see a lot of tremendous awakening of men and women, but also here in the West also, just on a very practical level. When my wife and I first started doing relationship seminars 30 years ago, it was 3 out of 4 of our participants would always be women. And then about 15 years ago, it was like 2 out of 3. And now 50-50. We have half men and half women. In many of them, sometimes it's a few in one direction or the other, but by and large, we get now as many people coming. And so that's very exciting to me because it says that right here in front of my eyes in my lifetime has been a change that I can actually give testimony to.
That makes me so happy. It makes me so happy. And I've seen that same growth, in working in men and women's workshops over the years. Actually, in some ways, this might just be personal to me somehow, but in some ways, I've seen more men even recently coming to some of the workshops that I lead than women, which has been really, really surprising. And I feel grateful for that. And it's amazing that you've had, these years to see that shift and change.
Yeah, I forgot to ask you, Shana, what part of the country or world do you live in?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
In the Bay Area. Yeah. Well, that's I do a lot of seminars. My wife and I do a lot of seminars up there too, and but we found exactly the same thing happening in Chicago and Berlin and places like that. In fact, in Europe, on a few occasions, we've had more men show up to a relationship seminar than women, and so to me, that just says a whole lot about the world changing right in front of our eyes.
It does. It makes me really, really happy. Well, I'm curious if there's anything else you feel called to let men who have been struggling with dating, sex, or love know. Anything in your toolbox of wisdom and all of your years of experience that you want to convey.
One thing that changed my life and my relationship with Katie many years ago is I started out our relationship, I was quite critical, and she and I both come from very critical families, and so we had kind of a habit of sort of bickering with each other or criticizing each other. And one day, it was really interesting, one day Katie's parents came to visit. My parents had both passed away, but Katie's parents came to visit us, and they bickered so much during the 3 days that we're here. It was like stunning to us. And when they were gone, we said, okay, never again are we going to bicker. From here on out, we're going to dedicate ourselves to creating a relationship that runs on positive energy. And so we put ourselves, we put ourselves on a zero criticism diet in our relationship. And, we would go for 10 days without any kind of criticism. Then one of us would have one slip out, and then we'd recommit to our criticism-free life again. And it probably took us 50 different recommitments to get to it. But then suddenly, one day, we weren't criticizing each other. And now it's probably been 15 or 20 years since either one of us have said a single critical word.
What? That blows my mind. That's amazing.
It is amazing. Well, I can tell you for sure, we've lived in this house for almost 15 years now here in Ojai, and we have never expressed a harsh or critical word to each other for sure since we've lived in this house. And it could have been for years before, but I know for sure because I started thinking about that when we moved over here. I wondered if anybody was ever going to say a critical word in this house, and nobody ever has. So it's such a beautiful environment to walk into. But anyway, getting back to the point with men, it was such an important thing for me to shift out of listening listening to criticize, and shift into listening to appreciate and listening to draw forth. And it really came from beginning to see women as equals and seeing them as equals, overcoming my old past programming of seeing us as unequals. And it's a big program. It's a long journey, I think, for men and women to learn how to really communicate heart to heart as equals. But to me, it's the most fascinating thing on earth because, the payoff is so awesome because I've had the opportunity to live in this field of thriving love now for many years, and there's nothing really like it. I want to have everybody on earth have a taste of that and a whole lifetime of that. That's what our lives are all about here.
Well, thank you so much for being an example of that and for, knowing that's possible and creating that. And one thing I love about what you said is that you committed to that, and then there were times where, first it started with 10 days, and then one of you broke that commitment, and then you recommitted. And so I love that reminder, too, that when we commit to something, it's not that we have to be perfect with it, that we get to actually be human and make mistakes, and then we get to recommit, and we get to love each other in that process of making that mistake or recommitting, too.
That's it. If you go to the gym every day and do a few chin-ups, you come to the end of the year feeling really strong. But if you tried to go the last day of the year and do 5,000 chin-ups, it wouldn't work very well. So a little bit every day is where it's at. Yeah.
And I'm just thinking too of your experience of doing this over time, and for men who are out there and who are single and really coming to a woman for the first time, that lens of looking for appreciation and calling forth. I've seen that. I've seen women just blossom even before a man speaks. I've seen women blossom in the eyes and the seeing and the appreciation and the loving. I've felt that myself, and I've seen that happen with other women, and so it's such a powerful lens. And then to really get to that doesn't mean that you can't, it doesn't mean that you never have a frustration or something that you want to be different, but there really is a way. And one of the seminars I've led, we talk about how beneath every complaint or criticism there's a desire, right? And so to be able to tap into underneath that criticism or underneath that frustration, what are we really wanting with each other, and calling that out in each other feels like the most beautiful way to be in relationship to me.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Good being with you, and I wish everybody good success in their lifelong journey of learning to love themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.